Gerald Knaus. He's the chairman at the European Stability Initiative in Berlin. Thanks so much for joining us here on TRT News Hour. I want to broaden up the talk, and we've just seen my colleague speaking there about the impact of the fall of the wall in Germany itself. But I want to ask you, Gerald, 30 years after the Berlin Wall went down, how concerning is it that Europe is building even more walls to the point that it has reportedly built over 1,000 kilometers of walls, the equivalent of 6 times the Berlin Wall?
Well, if we look at the big trend of the last 30 years that started in this city just a few meters behind where I'm sitting at the Brandenburg Gate, where the wall used to be, it's been a story of 3 unifications: the unification of the city of Berlin, the unification of Germany. But the biggest story, of course, was the bringing together of East and West Europe. And the real story here has been the disappearance of borders. We had 16,000 kilometers of land border, which in the last decades, because of the Schengen system, have disappeared. They are invisible. So between Germany and Poland, you don't see a border. Between Germany and France, Switzerland and Italy, throughout Europe, you can travel without controls. This is new. Now, what we've seen also in the last few years, however, is a deadly border around Schengen. So we've seen both borders go down and become invisible, and deadly borders, particularly in the Mediterranean. And that, of course, is deeply disconcerting, because we've had almost 18,000 people drown just in the last 5 years trying to cross from Africa or Turkey to the European Union in little boats. And that is now the biggest humanitarian crisis that Europe is facing at its borders.
Absolutely. As you say, deadly borders, it's a very strong term. And I want to ask you, what do you make of this media report that Europe's biggest arms and security suppliers are making billions from constructing those borders? And the majority, they're coming from contracts from the EU and member states.
Well, I'm not really sure which borders we are talking about here, because the biggest problem of Europe is, of course, the sea. And you can't build a wall on the sea. Most people who came irregularly in recent years came in little boats from Libya, from Morocco, or from, in fact, as Turks know very well, from the Turkish coast to the Greek islands. I mean, we've seen the fence that the Hungarians have built, but on, for example, the Polish-Ukrainian border, there is no border wall. The real challenge for Europe is to find partners like Ukraine, like Turkey, with whom it can cooperate for mutual benefit to make these borders more easy to cross and less deadly. And the only way you can achieve this is by having partners that you can cooperate with. And one way in which Europe has achieved this has been to give visa-free travel to many more countries. Just in the last 10 years, 100 million Europeans, all the Balkans except Kosovo, Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine, can all travel visa-free to Europe, which is in the European interest and in the interest of those countries. And I think this is the way Europe has to work with its neighbors. Building walls will not work, because unless they are deadly, and nobody can want deadly walls, walls can always be crossed.
And clearly, as you said, they're not working then. I want to put to you what Mikhail Gorbachev wrote in Time magazine. He said in 1989, the world chose peace, and we need that vision today. How far or close are we to that now?
Well, there was this promise that for East Europeans, if they join the European Union, the institutions, they would be at peace, prosperous, secure. If we look at Europe today, however, we see that there are conflicts all around this zone of peace. We have a war in Ukraine, we had a war in Georgia a few years ago, we have fighting in Syria, we had fighting in Iraq, we have fighting in Libya. So what you have is a zone of stability, and all around it you have conflict. And that is, of course, deeply troubling, and it just means that Europe and countries like Turkey need to find ways to make sure that this zone of stability can be extended. And that also means taking care of the refugees that are fleeing to Europe and making sure that as refugees are fleeing, they are taken care of, they will be protected, they will not drown at the sea, they will get support to have their children in schools, they will get health care. This is the big challenge of the day. So yes, there's a lot to celebrate about the going down of the Berlin Wall and the unification of Europe, but there is nothing to celebrate about the state of Europe's external borders and the many conflicts surrounding Europe today.
It's been great to get your thoughts and analysis, really. Gerald Knaus, thank you very much for your time here on the NewsHour.